On a sticky August evening, when the air hung heavy with the kind of heat that clings to your skin like a second shirt, a silver sedan rolled slowly down Oak Ridge Boulevard. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Inside the car, Lena adjusted the rearview mirror with one hand while the other rested lightly on the steering wheel. She'd just wrapped up a 12-hour shift at the county health department, where she'd spent the day analyzing data on childhood asthma rates in underserved neighborhoods. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was still buzzing with numbers, maps, and the quiet urgency of work that rarely made headlines but changed lives all the same. She signaled before merging into the right lane. Clear, deliberate, the way she'd been taught in driver's ed 20 years ago. But seconds later, red and blue lights flashed behind her, pulsing like a warning heartbeat. She pulled over without hesitation, rolling down her window as she reached for her license and registration. Her pulse quickened not out of guilt. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but out of that familiar, weary awareness that sometimes, for people who looked like her, doing everything right still wasn't enough. The officer who approached moved with a slow, deliberate swagger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a mustache that looked like it belonged in an old police procedural. His nameplate read Mercer. He didn't greet her, didn't say evening or ma'am or anything that might suggest he saw her as a person. Instead, he leaned in, one hand resting on the roof of her car, the other hovering near his belt. "License and registration," he said. Voice flat. She handed them over without a word, keeping her movements slow and visible. She'd learned that early. Make every motion obvious, unhurried, non-threatening, even when you're just reaching for your glove compartment. Mercer studied her documents under the dim glow of his flashlight, then glanced back at her with narrowed eyes. "You live around here?" he asked, though her address was right there on the license. "Yes," she replied, voice calm. "About 10 minutes away." He grunted as if her answer required skepticism. "This neighborhood's got a lot of break-ins lately. You fit the description of someone we're looking for." She blinked. "What description is that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he straightened up and jerked his chin toward the passenger seat. "Step out of the vehicle. For officer safety." Her stomach dropped. She knew this script. She'd seen it play out in videos, read about it in reports, heard friends recount it in hushed, angry tones over coffee. But knowing it and living it were two different things. Still, she nodded, turned off the engine, and opened the door slowly. As she stood on the sidewalk, hands at her sides, he began circling her like she was a suspect in a lineup. "Keep your hands where I can see 'em," he said, though she hadn't moved them. "You got anything on you I should know about? Weapons, drugs?" "No, sir," she said. "Just my phone and my keys." He reached for her purse, which she'd set on the hood of the car. "Mind if I check?" She did mind, but she also knew saying so could make things worse. So she stayed silent as he unzipped it, rifling through receipts, lip balm, a folded grocery list. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. Just the ordinary clutter of a working woman's life. Then, under his breath but not quiet enough, she heard him mutter, "Should have stayed in your own part of town." The words landed like a slap. She didn't flinch, but inside something hardened. She'd spent her whole life proving she belonged, in classrooms, in labs, in meetings where she was often the only one who looked like her. And now, on a quiet street in a city she helped serve, she was being treated like an intruder in her own home. Without thinking, she reached into her pocket and turned on the voice recorder on her phone. She didn't announce it, didn't make a show of it. She just let it run, capturing every word, every pause, every shift in tone. Mercer finally closed her purse and stepped back. "All right," he said, handing back her license like it was a favor. "You can go, but watch your speed, and maybe stick to streets where you won't draw attention." She didn't respond. She just got back in the car, started the engine, and drove away, her hands steady on the wheel even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't cry, not then, but when she got home, parked in her driveway beneath the soft yellow glow of her porch light, she sat for a long time in the silence, replaying the encounter in her head. Later that night, she uploaded the audio to a secure folder and drafted a complaint to the city's Civilian Oversight Board. She didn't write it in anger. She wrote it with precision, dates, times, exact quotes, the name on his badge. She knew emotion wouldn't convince anyone, but facts might. What she didn't know was that her complaint wouldn't vanish into a bureaucratic black hole like so many others. It would land on a desk that mattered. It would be listened to. And in a twist no one saw coming, not Mercer, not the department, not even Lena herself, it would set off a chain of events that would change everything. But that night, all she knew was the weight of being seen not as a doctor, not as a neighbor, not as a human being, but as a problem to be managed. And yet, even in that moment of humiliation, she held on to something quiet and unshakable, the belief that dignity didn't have to be given. Sometimes you just had to claim it and protect it for yourself. Weeks passed after the traffic stop, and life on the surface seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm. Lena returned to her work, analyzing health trends, attending community meetings, grabbing coffee with friends who listened with tight-lipped concern when she told them what happened. She'd filed the complaint, sent the audio file, and waited. At first, she checked her email constantly, expecting some kind of acknowledgement, a timeline, maybe even an apology. But the response, when it finally came, was a single paragraph wrapped in polite corporate language. "Thank you for your report. Your concerns have been noted and forwarded to the appropriate department for review." That was it. No follow-up. No indication anyone had actually listened. It felt like shouting into a canyon and hearing only your own echo bounce back. But behind the scenes, something else was stirring. Lena didn't know it yet, but her complaint had landed in a folder that was already growing thicker by the month. Officer Mercer's name had appeared before, once from a delivery driver pulled over for looking suspicious while double-parked outside a pharmacy. Another time from a college student stopped while walking home from the library at night. Each report followed a similar pattern. No charges filed, no citation issued, just a vague officer safety justification and a lingering sense of unease that stayed with the person long after the encounter ended. Most of these complaints never made it past the first desk. Some were dismissed as misunderstandings. Others were labeled unfounded because there was no corroborating evidence, as if the word of someone who'd been singled out wasn't enough. But lately, a few newer staff members in the oversight office had started connecting the dots. They noticed how often Mercer's name showed up, how the descriptions from different people, men, women, young, old, sounded eerily alike. The tone, the questions, the little comments slipped in under the guise of routine procedure. One afternoon, a junior analyst named Tasha stayed late, cross-referencing body cam requests with internal logs. She found something odd. Mercer had technical issues with his body cam during nearly half of his traffic stops over the past year. The department had noted it as equipment failure, but Tasha wondered why it only seemed to happen during stops involving people of color. She printed out the dates, matched them with complaint filings, and quietly added her notes to the growing file. Meanwhile, Lena tried to move on. She told herself she'd done her part. If nothing came of it, at least she hadn't stayed silent. But then one rainy Thursday, she got a call from a local reporter, a woman who'd been digging into patterns of biased policing in the city. She'd heard about Lena's complaint through a source in the oversight office and asked if she'd be willing to talk. Not for a headline, not for drama, just to understand what really happened. Lena hesitated. She wasn't looking for attention, but she also knew that stories like hers often disappeared unless someone was willing to speak up. So she agreed to meet, not at a newsroom but at a quiet cafe downtown. Over steaming mugs of tea, she played the audio. The reporter listened, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to quiet anger. She didn't ask for sensational quotes. She just asked, "Do you think this was about you or about what you represent?" Lena thought about that. "I think," she said slowly, "he didn't see me. He saw a stereotype, and he treated me like it was real." The story ran a week later, not on the front page, but in the Metro section under a modest headline, "Pattern or Prejudice? Residents question traffic stops by one officer." It included snippets of Lena's audio, with her voice altered for privacy, summaries of other complaints, and a statement from the police department saying they take all allegations seriously and were committed to fair and impartial policing. The article didn't go viral, but it spread. Neighbors shared it in group chats. Community organizers referenced it at town halls. A local pastor mentioned it during Sunday service, and slowly more people came forward, some with fresh complaints, others with old ones they'd never filed because they thought no one would care. Then came the video. a teenager, waiting at a bus stop near Mercer's usual patrol route, had been recording a TikTok when Mercer pulled over a man for failing to fully stop at a stop sign, a violation so minor most officers would have let it slide. But Mercer's tone was sharp, his stance aggressive. The teen kept filming, not because he planned to, but because something about the way the officer spoke, the way he loomed over the driver, felt wrong. When he posted the clip with a simple caption, "Why does this keep happening?" it got thousands of views in hours. The footage was grainy, but the audio was clear, and the words were chillingly familiar. City officials could no longer brush it off as isolated incidents. Public pressure built. Local council members demanded answers. Even some officers, quietly off the record, admitted they'd noticed Mercer's behavior but didn't know how to speak up without risking their own careers. Then, the police chief held a press conference. Standing stiffly at a podium, he announced that Internal Affairs would launch a full investigation into Officer Mercer's conduct. "We hold our officers to the highest standards," he said, eyes fixed on his notes. "Any behavior that violates those standards will be addressed accordingly." Lena watched the press conference on her laptop, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted, because she knew this wasn't really about one officer. It was about a system that let things like this happen for years without consequence. But maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. What she didn't know yet was that the person leading that internal affairs investigation would be someone the department never saw coming. Someone who understood not just policy but pain. Someone who had stood on that sidewalk, hands at her sides, wondering if doing everything right would ever be enough. And when that truth finally came to light, it wouldn't just shock Mercer, it would change everything. The morning the department-wide memo landed in inboxes, most officers skimmed it while sipping coffee or scrolling through their phones between calls. Internal Affairs leadership update didn't sound urgent, just another bureaucratic reshuffle, the kind that happened every few years when City Hall wanted to show it was listening to the community. A few read it out of habit. Fewer still actually processed what it said. But when one sergeant reached the name at the bottom, Dr. Lena Hayes, Director of Civilian Oversight and Internal Affairs Review, he nearly choked on his coffee. Lena Hayes. The name circled through the precinct like a rumor at first. Whispers in the break room. Raised eyebrows during roll call. Some officers assumed it was a different person, same name, different face. Others remembered the traffic stop, the article, the video, and then it clicked. The woman Mercer had pulled over weeks ago wasn't just some civilian with a complaint. She was now the person in charge of deciding whether his career would, and the news hit Mercer like a gut punch. He'd heard about the new civilian oversight role months ago, a reform pushed through after protests demanded more accountability. He'd rolled his eyes at the time. A civilian running IA? He'd scoffed to a partner over lunch. What's next, letting kindergarten teachers run SWAT? He figured it would be some political appointee with no real power. Someone who'd show up for photo ops and rubber stamp whatever the brass wanted. He never imagined it would be her. Lena hadn't sought the spotlight when she took the job. In fact, she'd done the opposite. For the first 6 months, she kept a low profile, attending briefings, shadowing veteran investigators, reading every policy manual cover to cover. She met with patrol officers one-on-one, not as a supervisor but as a listener. She asked questions like, "What do you wish the public understood about your job? And what makes you proud to wear the badge?" She didn't come in swinging accusations. She came in trying to understand. That quiet approach had disarmed even the most skeptical cops. They'd expected lectures, finger-pointing, grandstanding. Instead, they got someone who treated them like human beings. Flawed, yes, but capable of growth. Slowly, grudgingly, some began to trust her. Not all, but enough. What no one knew, not even the chief, was that Lena had recognized Mercer's voice the moment she listened to her own complaint audio during the onboarding process. She hadn't said a word. She filed it away, tucked it into the larger pattern she was beginning to map. She knew jumping in too soon would look personal, and in a role like hers, perception mattered as much as truth. But now, with the Mercer case officially assigned to her office, the moment had come. She didn't announce it dramatically. She simply scheduled a preliminary review meeting and added his file to the top of her stack. Inside that folder were more than 24 complaints, 3 body cam malfunctions during stops involving people of color, and now, her own recorded encounter. She read each page slowly, underlining phrases, noting inconsistencies, tracking timelines. She wasn't looking for a villain. She was looking for truth. Meanwhile, Mercer tried to act like nothing had changed. He joked with his usual crew, made his rounds, wrote his reports, but his hands were jittery. He kept replaying that traffic stop in his head. What he'd said, what she might have recorded, whether he'd left anything behind that could tie him directly to misconduct. He told himself it was just one stop, one misunderstanding, nothing that would hold up. But deep down, he knew better, because he remembered the look in her eyes, not fear, not anger, but something quieter and more unsettling, disappointment. Like she'd seen through him, like she knew exactly what he was doing and why. At the precinct, tension simmered. Some officers avoided the topic. Others made snide comments about outsiders running the show. A few younger cops, though, watched the situation unfold with cautious hope. They'd joined the force wanting to serve, not scare. They'd stayed silent for too long out of loyalty or fear. Now maybe things could shift. Lena felt the weight of all of it, the expectations, the skepticism, the hope. She wasn't naive. She knew this job could cost her friendships, invite threats, even put her in danger. But she also knew that real change didn't happen in press releases or policy memos. It happened in rooms where hard questions were asked and answered honestly. She spent nights reviewing training records, cross-checking shift logs, interviewing former complainants who'd been too afraid to speak before. One woman, a schoolteacher, broke down during their call. "I didn't file a report," she admitted, voice trembling. "I thought no one would believe me. But if you're really looking into this, I'll tell you everything." Lena listened, took notes, said thank you. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing it because someone had to. And then came the day she walked into the Internal Affairs wing, her office now clearly marked with her name, and found Mercer's file waiting on her desk, stamped priority review. She opened it one last time before the formal investigation began. At the very front was a printed screenshot of her car, pulled over under those flickering streetlights. Someone had attached it anonymously, maybe as a warning, or maybe as a reminder. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she closed the folder, straightened her blazer, and walked down the hall to schedule the first official interview. Mercer still thought this was about one bad stop. He had no idea he was about to face the woman he'd tried to make feel small, and the system he'd assumed would always protect him. And this time, she wouldn't be standing on the sidewalk. She'd be sitting across the table. The room was small, barely big enough for a table, 4 chairs, and the humming ventilation unit in the corner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a flat, unforgiving glow on the gray walls. There were no windows, no decorations, no distractions, just a space designed for one thing: truth. Lena sat at the far end of the table, hands folded in front of her, posture calm but alert. She wore a dark blazer not to look imposing but because it helped her feel grounded. Across from her sat Officer Mercer, flanked by 2 union representatives, one older, with tired eyes and a neatly pressed suit, the other younger, arms crossed, jaw set like he was already bracing for battle. Mercer had walked in expecting a bureaucrat, someone soft-spoken, easily rattled, maybe a little nervous. He'd rehearsed his answers in the car. Standard procedure, officer safety, no ill intent. He figured if he stuck to the script, stayed polite but firm, he'd walk out the same way he walked in, with his badge, his pension, his reputation intact. But then he saw her face. Recognition hit him like a wave. His eyes widened just slightly, his shoulders tensing. He didn't say anything, but his breath hitched just for a second. Lena noticed. She didn't react. She simply opened the file in front of her and placed a small digital recorder in the center of the table. "Before we begin," she said, voice steady, "I want to remind everyone that this is an official internal affairs interview. You're not under arrest, but your statements may be used in disciplinary proceedings. Do you understand?" Mercer nodded stiffly. "Yeah." She pressed record. The first 20 minutes were procedural. Dates, shifts, general questions about his training. Mercer answered smoothly, even smugly at times. He leaned back in his chair, as if this were just another formality. But then Lena slid a printed transcript across the table. On August 17th, she said, you pulled over a silver sedan on Oak Ridge Boulevard. Do you remember that stop? His eyes flicked to the paper. He swallowed. I make a lot of stops. This one, she said gently, was recorded. She didn't play the audio right away. She let the silence stretch. Let him sit with the memory. Then quietly, she tapped her laptop and his own voice filled the room. Sharp, condescending, dripping with assumption. Should have stayed in your own part of town. Mercer's face drained of color. He glanced at his union reps who looked just as stunned. One of them opened his mouth to object, but Lena held up a hand. I'm not here to argue, she said. I'm here to understand. Why did you say that? I didn't, he started. The recording says you did, she interrupted, not harshly but firmly. And it's not the only one. She played another clip, this one from 2 years earlier, during a stop of a young man walking home from his night shift. Mercer's voice again. You're lucky I don't make you eat that sidewalk. The young man had filed a complaint, but it was closed as unsubstantiated. No body cam footage. No witnesses. Just his word against an officer's now. There was more. She played a third recording, this one not from a civilian, but from a fellow officer's body cam, accidentally left on during a break room conversation, Mercer laughing. Gotta hit my quota somehow. Might as well be the usual suspects. The room went dead silent. Mercer's hands resting on the table began to tremble. He looked at his union reps, but they avoided his gaze. They knew what this meant. This wasn't just one bad call. This was a pattern. And patterns once documented were hard to explain away. Lena didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, do you believe every person you stopped deserved to be treated that way? He didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly. I stood on that sidewalk, she said, voice low but clear, and you looked right through me. Not as a driver. Not as a taxpayer. Not as someone who works to keep this city healthy. You saw a stereotype, and you acted on it. Mercer finally spoke, voice strained. I was doing my job. Your job, she said, is to protect and serve everyone, not just the people who look like you. He tried to deflect. Blamed stress. Blamed a few bad nights. Said he'd never meant harm. But the evidence kept piling up. Text messages. Witness statements, internal logs showing repeated stops in the same neighborhoods, always targeting the same kind of people. At one point, the older union rep sighed and rubbed his temples. Look, he said quietly, we're not here to defend the indefensible. But let's be honest, this kind of thing's been happening for years. He's not the first. He won't be the last. Lena looked at him. Maybe not, she said. But he's the one in this room right now, and that means something. The interview lasted 3 hours. By the end, Mercer wasn't leaning back anymore. He sat hunched, eyes down, voice barely above a whisper. The arrogance had drained out of him, replaced by something raw and exposed. Shame, maybe, or fear, or both. When it was over, Lena turned off the recorder, closed the file, and stood. You'll receive a formal notice of findings within 10 business days, she said. Until then, you're on administrative leave. Mercer didn't argue. He just nodded, stood slowly, and walked out with his reps trailing behind him. Alone in the room, Lena took a deep breath. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. Not from anger, from the weight of what had just happened. She hadn't come here to destroy a man. She'd come to hold a system accountable, one person at a time. And in that quiet, fluorescent-lit room, something shifted. Not just for Mercer, but for everyone who'd ever been told they were overreacting or making it about race when all they wanted was to be treated like a human being. The truth had been spoken, and this time someone was finally listening. The news broke on a quiet Tuesday morning. No sirens, no press conference, just a short statement posted on the city's official website. Officer Dale Mercer had been terminated following a sustained finding of discriminatory conduct and abuse of authority. The decision was final. No appeal, no reassignment, just an end. For some, it was justice long overdue. For others, it was a betrayal, a good cop thrown under the bus for political reasons. Online comment sections flared with outrage and relief, conspiracy theories and quiet gratitude. But in the neighborhoods that had lived with the weight of stops like Mercer's for years, there was something quieter, a breath released. A sense that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. Lena didn't celebrate. She sat at her desk that morning, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and reread the final report one last time. Every word had been vetted, every fact double-checked. She'd made sure the process was airtight, not because she wanted to punish one man, but because she knew if this case fell apart on a technicality, it would set back real reform for years. This wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding trust brick by brick, and the work was just beginning. Within weeks, the city council fast-tracked a series of changes sparked by the investigation. Body cams would now auto-activate during all traffic stops. Supervisors would review random stops weekly for bias indicators. Most importantly, the Civilian Oversight Board, once a symbolic gesture, was given real teeth. Subpoena power, direct access to internal files, and a permanent seat at the table when discipline decisions were made. Lena didn't take credit. She showed up to meetings, listened more than she spoke, and made sure community voices, especially those who'd been silenced before, were heard. She met with teenagers who'd been stopped walking home from school. She sat with elders who remembered decades of being treated like suspects in their own neighborhoods. She didn't promise miracles. She just promised honesty. And slowly, people began to believe her. At the precinct, the mood shifted. Some officers resisted, muttering about political correctness and losing control. But others, especially the younger ones, leaned in. They asked for training on implicit bias. They volunteered for community ride-alongs. One even started a mentorship program pairing officers with local high school students, not to keep them out of trouble, but to build real relationships. Lena made a point to meet with them too. Not as a boss, but as a partner. "I don't expect perfection," she told a group over coffee in the break room. "I expect willingness. The moment you stop believing you can do better is the moment you stop serving." Mercer disappeared from public view. No interviews, no social media rants, just silence. Some said he moved out of state. Others claimed he was working construction under a different name. Lena never asked. She didn't need to see him suffer to feel vindicated. What mattered was that the pattern had been broken, and that the system had finally chosen accountability over comfort. Months later, on a cool autumn evening, Lena stood at a community forum held in a church basement. Folding chairs filled the room. Neighbors, officers, city officials, even a few reporters in the back. A woman stood at the mic, voice shaking slightly, and described being followed in a grocery store last week simply because of how she looked. When she finished, there was a long pause. Then from the back, an officer raised his hand. "I'm sorry that happened," he said, "and I want to do better." It wasn't a grand moment. No applause. But it was real. And in that room, it felt like a beginning. After the forum, a teenager approached Lena. She couldn't have been older than 17, wearing a hoodie and sneakers, eyes sharp with curiosity. "You're the one who took down that officer, right?" she asked. Lena smiled gently. "I didn't take him down. The truth did." The girl nodded, then said something that stayed with Lena for weeks. "My mom told me never to trust the system. But seeing you, maybe it doesn't have to stay broken." That was the real victory. Not the firing, not the headlines, but the quiet shift in what people believed was possible. Lena still kept her old habits. She still double-checked her mirrors before merging. She still kept her hands visible at traffic stops. Old instincts don't vanish overnight. But now when she walked into the internal affairs wing, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like someone who belonged, not because she'd been given a title, but because she'd earned the right to help shape what came next. She started mentoring young women, especially those from communities that had long been policed but never protected. She taught them how to navigate systems that weren't built for them, how to speak truth without losing their humanity, how to lead with both strength and compassion. And whenever a new officer walked into her office for a routine check-in, nervous, unsure, maybe even defensive, she didn't start with accusations. She started with a question. How do you plan to earn the trust of everyone you serve? Sometimes they fumbled the answer. Sometimes they surprised her. But the fact that they were being asked at all, that was progress. The story of that traffic stop on Oak Ridge Boulevard didn't end with a firing. It ended with a ripple, small at first, then wider, touching training manuals, policy drafts, late-night conversations between parents and kids, and the quiet courage of people who decided to speak up even when they thought no one would listen. Lena never wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to be seen, and in the end, by insisting on her own dignity, she helped make space for others to claim theirs. The work wasn't finished. It never really is. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was moving in the right direction. One honest conversation, one fair policy, one reclaimed moment of trust at a time.